You're saying, well, we only have 5 acres, this is the only way we can do it. I'd just like to see what some data on
Well, cost of construction is about $300 to $400 a square foot. So if you work those numbers out, it'd be almost $12 million to build individual buildings instead of 6 or 7 for one building. It's almost double the cost. And then if you're only doing 2 floors, you're basically doing 3 floors and having 1 footprint. It's exponentially more money to spread it out. Like a ranch is more money than a home. So it would be probably $12 million. I guess you put some rough numbers to do that. For those buildings, to be at 6 or 7 for one. It's almost double the cost.
Well,
Typical cost for the truck right now.
yeah, that's what I'm just asking, is we'd like to see the numbers.
Well, that's the number.
Difference.
It can be written down and given to you.
I mean, if it's the will of the board to see, a hard estimate for the numbers, we'd have to go get that for you. And I don't know whether you need that in order to make a decision here tonight, or whether you want to continue it for later time to have that information. But if we got it for you, I can tell you that that's where it will go. Is literally if you add $100 to the cost of the project, you saw in the budgets that we passed out between 38 and 37 units. There's nothing to give. The budget was, I think, over the first 10 years, it was a net of $1,200 or something like that in positives. The 38-unit building, the projected cash flow for the first 5 years is $8,000. And then it kind of comes up and down with different financing things, but there's literally nothing to spare in that budget. And then with 37 units, you lose $13,000 over the first 5 years. Actually, that's per year. 11,000 lost in the first year, 12,000, 12,000, 12,000, 13,000. It just gets a little bit deeper, and you don't get positive cash flow as we flow. And that's changing the plan. So if we get those numbers for you, which if you want to push us to do it, but it's going to show you almost instantly that the thing, it goes negative. It just is going to cost even a marginal amount, even a little extra snowplow. It's all it takes to tip this project over and make it not financially feasible. Yeah, if you want the data, you can have.
Okay, we can talk about it for a bit or something you want to see right or not.
Thank you for that. I wanted to comment on a few of the other questions that you had so that the folks at home would hear the discussion as well. The folks that were not members of the board can hear the discussion as well. The board asked us to provide 5 areas of additional information which we provided in writing to the board. First was information about workforce housing developments in towns with 5,000 or fewer residents. We were able to identify that there are workforce housing projects identified by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development on its resource finder website in the towns of Sandwich, Ossipee, Woodstock, Pittsburgh, Groveton, Woodsville, Lisbon, Lincoln, Halstead, Ashland, Greenfield, Colebrook, Marlboro, Troy, Newbury, Bethlehem, Whitefield, Rollinsford, Antrim, Gorham, Tamworth, Warner, Lancaster, Bristol, Campton, Walpole, Pittsfield, Newton, Winchester, New London, Lee, Northwood, Charleston, Epsom, and Moulton Borough. And all of those towns have less than 5,000. Some of them have less than 1,000 per population.
Yeah, I read that, and I'm not questioning whether those towns have workforce housing or not. It's just asking a question as to what type of units and stuff like that. And that.
What type of what?
What type of buildings, how big they are, things of that nature. That's probably going to take a little time to get that information. It's, I'd be interested to know. I know you showed us some pictures of one in Gary and one somewhere else.
Yeah, legendary in Salem were the 2 that I showed you before, but cut this, I think, of some of those. So these are all different sizes, 20, 40, 28, 40, 26, 28, 16, 19, 32, 16, 20, 24, 6, 12, 50, 50, 43, 70, 24, and on down the list. I can kind of read them all, but they're all in that ballpark in terms of the size. I think 70 is the largest one I see on the list. And these are all multi-family housing.
Does it say what towns the different sizes are in?
Sure.
It's not a copy of that.
Was that in the material sheet?
Not this list, the actual sizes of the developments. Yeah, we can provide this to you. This comes from New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. 70 is in Greenville. Epsom has 50, Colebrook has 50, Alstead has 20, Antrim has 40, Ashland has got 2 projects, 28 and 48. So there kind of depends on what they are. As to which ones there are, some of them are listed here twice. They've had 2 developments. Actually, like in Woodsville, there's 3 different phases that they did of 14, 3, and 13. And then, you know, what dates any of these were built kind of matters in terms of what was financially feasible at the time. I know that that's the big question that you had earlier about 8-unit buildings versus larger buildings.
That was actually going to be my next question was, does it show on there what year these were built?
Not on this list, it doesn't.
Do you have that information?
I don't. It isn't available from Housing Finance Authority or from HUD in terms of when the particular buildings were listed. They're all, if they're on HUD's website, they're all still subject to the rent restrictions, the covenants to keep the rent at market, below market rate. Otherwise, they wouldn't be on HUD's website anymore. And so, yeah, that's what we know about them.
Well, that information kind of would lead into my next question. Yes.
I think it would be appropriate that we know there's a big difference between 5,000 people and 1850. We would like to see more information in our area of 1850. You know, a smaller town like Wigan, about 5,000.
Sure. I have to check this, but I kind of made a mental note in my head as I went down this. That list is in towns of increasing size, in the order that I read them. And I think somewhere, I'm guessing, I think Pittsfield might be the tipping point for that 1,800. I'd have to check and see, but a good chunk of that list is in towns that are smaller than you guys. I don't know how many were on that list that I just read out, but a significant chunk of it, at least a third of that list, is in towns smaller than you are. So the other information that the board asked us to get is the authorization from the property owner for the submission of the variance application. That's been provided a list of the 20 and 30-year covenant obligations related to workforce housing. And so we provided an answer to that. And interestingly, diving a little bit deeper into it, the source of the covenants, the concept of having covenants comes from federal law and then state law, but the actual implementation of it is right here in the local zoning code. The state empowers you to set the covenants, and the county has set them in the regulations that the rent control covenants are in place for. The statute actually says that covenants shall be for the term specified in the regulations of the land use board. In your regulations, you define it based on what workforce housing is in third year. Yeah, for units will be rented with deed restrictions and a recorded housing agreement in a form satisfactory to the planning board that limits for a period of 30 years, renewable upon each rental, the rental price for each unit to an affordable price as determined by the formula set forth above in a master plan. And that master plan formula is your town master plan, but it also references the statutory formula and the federal formula. So it's based on there being 60% that the rental housing, which is affordable to a housing with an income of no more than 60% of the median income for a 3-person household for counties and metropolitan areas of the state of New Hampshire, applicable to Middleton, as published by the Housing and Urban Development Department. And so that's the formula for calculating the rent, and the town regulations have decided that 30 years is the appropriate length for that rent covenant. In addition to that, other covenants and other requirements that are imposed upon housing, there are different requirements on the quality of housing and habitability and that sort of thing, which are enforced by HUD. They're not recorded as a covenant, and so I sort of treated them differently. But let's see. Quality standards, financial standards, criminal record, removal of anyone on a sex offender registry, anyone in drug-related activities, and the resident selection process and all of that.
Are those related to financing?
Related to the financial viability of the project, there has to be certain reserves built into the budget, and to make sure that we can keep it up, maintain it, replace it if it needs it. And all
But
that.
does it just have to do with federal financing, or like how does HUD get involved?
So HUD is the impetus behind the tax-free bond financing that supports the project. There's also other tax credits if you end up doing something with technology, and if you can do things that are energy efficient or solar. Each time you open your hand to the federal government, they have some requirements that come along with it, and so you're obligated to live with all of those for as long as the financing continues to exist. The financing can exist for as long as 40 years, and then it can be refinanced. But even then, if you look carefully at the language that you selected in your local zoning ordinance, these covenants are effectively permanent because they renew at each rental. So every time the apartment comes empty and gets re-rented, the 30-year clock starts over again on that apartment. So.
And if you were to finance not through tax-free bonds or NEFA or HUD, then those restrictions wouldn't apply. I understand that's exceedingly uncommon, but.
Those restrictions would not apply, but the result of doing that is you can't make the project affordable at that rate.
Oh.
That tax-free financing, the way that it works with the financing is an investor puts forward some of the money, some of the money is borrowed, and then some of the money is available in terms of tax credits. And so the tax credits can take a couple $1 million off the cost of the project, and the investor can take a few $1 million off the cost of the project, and the borrowed funds for a $6 million project might be $2.5 million. If you actually try to borrow $6 million and collect it from rent, your rent is 3 times the amount that could qualify for affordable. So it's not just that it's exceedingly rare for people to do it, it's functionally not possible. That's why the federal government has the program, because otherwise there wouldn't be workforce housing. Sure. Okay, so that was covenants. The question number 4 that the board asked us to follow up on was income ranges for renters in the target audience. And the income renters, the ranges for workforce housing are established by state law and calculated, published by New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority on an annual basis. That's that formula that I read out a little bit earlier that you guys had embedded into your regulation. The income level associated with rental of workforce housing is 60% of the 2023 HUD median area income, adjusted for a family of 3, and that is $73,440 a year in income in the Portsmouth, Rochester, New Hampshire HUD metropolitan fair market rental area. And if anyone's wondering, does Middleton fit into that area? Yeah, it's assigned to that area. It's not a matter of us deciding where it fits in or which one to use. That's the one Middleton is assigned to. That income level will support a gross monthly rent, which is the number we talked about last time, of $1,840 for not just the rent, but rent plus utilities for the apartment. Then the last area that the board asked us to follow up on was information on how the project will be affected by renters receiving government subsidies. And so that question is a little bit like reading the tea leaves into the future, because we can't predict what profile of renters may be. But we certainly believe there's absolutely the opportunity for renters to be in this building to receive government rent subsidies. It's part of the qualifications for workforce housing is that housing is isn't kept away from those renters in the market if they're interested in the rent and can otherwise fill an apartment. But part of that, and there was a lot of discussion last time about people that make 60%, 40%, 20% of the median income in the area. All of those concepts, the people who live there, even, and there was some discussion last time about maybe people with disabilities or people on welfare for the town, all of those things are built into the definition of workforce housing. Those are designed into what workforce housing is. We couldn't exclude it from workforce housing any more than the zoning ordinance in Middleton could exclude that population of people from workforce housing. It's sort of embedded in the definition all the way up to the Fed and state law. And so, I can't take responsibility for the incomes of renters that are in workforce housing. It's kind of, we're all stuck with it. We probably are there. That's the information that you asked about. And then for those of you that had a chance to review the letter that I wrote, I also did follow up on some of the discussion that occurred last time before the board, which is the notion that does Middleton already provide its fair share of workforce housing in the area? And if it does, maybe this project doesn't need to go forward, or projects like it doesn't need to go forward. And I wanted to make sure to address that a little bit because I think that's probably one of the riskier roads for the town to go down. And so what I shared in my letter, and it certainly will be corrected if it's wrong, but to our knowledge, Middleton's never approved a workforce housing development or even a single unit of workforce housing under the workforce housing statute ordinance that you have. HUD does not identify any workforce housing in Middleton or in the towns surrounding Middleton. Upon information and belief, there's no units of workforce housing in Middleton that are subject to an enforceable covenant related to rent affordability. And the Seacoast Regional Planning Commission's 2023 Regional Housing Needs Assessment, which was published March 17, 2023, about a year ago, on page 186, ranks Middleton, along with New Durham, as providing the worst opportunity for workforce housing in Stratford County. And so I want to offer everybody a caution not to necessarily suppose that, well, we've got two places that you can either purchase or rent that are a little more affordable, and therefore we probably meet our workforce housing requirements. It's really important to look at the language of the statute, and this actually echoes one of the various criteria we have to answer. Our statute says, all citizens of the state benefit from a balanced supply of housing, which is affordable to persons and families of low and moderate income. Establishment of housing which is decent, safe, sanitary, and affordable to low and moderate income persons and families, this is the important part, is in the best interests of each community and the state of New Hampshire, and serves a vital public need. Now, you know that part of your variance criteria is the variance request contrary to the public interest. And the state, the statute, already specifies that it is in the best interest of each community to supply this kind of housing. So the statute goes on to say, opportunity for development of such housing shall not be prohibited or unreasonably discouraged by use of municipal planning and zoning powers or by unreasonable interpretations of such powers. And so that's the backdrop, playing field that the legislature created for us. And the facts that I talked about with respect to workforce housing in Middleton is what we are able to garner in terms of the surrounding facts that play into whether Middleton already has a supply of workforce housing or a sufficient supply of workforce housing to meet its statutory regulations. We think it's pretty clear that Middleton doesn't have a sufficient supply of workforce housing to satisfy its obligations, its fair share, as the statute calls it. With that in mind, I know that you've already asked for a couple of pieces of additional information that we may have to have continuance to go collect.
I have a question just in regards to that. I mean, I'm hearing all of it. I mean, even though I can understand and assume this and think this, but do you have evidence of this? Because Just thinking of myself and family members and people that I know, 4 or 5 families, they're in that criteria. Affordability is based on, like you just said, a family of 3 making $73,000, like, and their rent is about $1,800. Like, I'm already assuming to myself right now, my family, some other families, we are all in that criteria. I mean, do you have evidence that Middleton doesn't have their household incomes are not?
Yes, absolutely so. I mean, those are the things that we talked about before. So workforce housing is more than just meeting that income threshold. Income housing has a rent covenant guarantee enforceable by the federal government and all the other support that goes along with it. And we've done our best to look, and actually I don't think that there's any units of multifamily housing in
I think it's a
Middleton.
multi-family. I was just thinking of individual single-family homes, is what I was referring to.
Sure, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. That was part of the discussion from last time, where people said, you know, my apartment is this rent, or I rent, you know, somebody that I know rents apartments for this amount of rent. None of those things are enforceable as workforce housing. So that rent can increase tomorrow or next week, or that can get torn down. You can evict the people and put up a business or any of those kinds of things, which differs from what is workforce housing. There's also no requirement that any of that housing consider people who make even less, 60%, 50, 40, 30, as workforce housing typically does. Now, you also asked for specific evidence. HUD lists and identifies catalogs workforce housing, and they don't find any in Middleton. And the Seacoast Regional Planning Commission, which is, you're a member of the commission, Middleton is, and I assume had some level of input into this housing needs assessment that your regional planning commission produced. And here's their finding. Middleton, along with Durham, providing the worst opportunity for housing in Stratford County.
Nowhere in the statutory definition does it talk about workforce housing or affordable requiring covenants. So where are you finding that?
The covenants are required for it to be workforce housing. That's the only place that it's going to be enforceable. Otherwise, whatever you've got doesn't have any public obligation to be in that affordable range, which is what the definition of workforce housing is.
The definition is housing that is affordable. It's not housing that it's required to stay affordable. I mean, the ADU definition says an ADU now is that it's workforce housing. It doesn't say anything about that.
So without the covenants, though, there's no public record of even what the rent is. So we'd be able to enforce it or count it, which is why when you ask for data, if you want to know what the average rent is in Middleton, there's a bunch of private entities that have tried to calculate that. But does anybody really know what that apartment rents for? And that's why the covenants are absolutely critical to actually identifying something being workforce housing. Without them, they're low-cost housing, perhaps, but we don't even know that for a fact. And couldn't force that homeowner or that tenant to share that what's essentially private information.
So based on what you're saying, every house in Middleton charged $1,200 a unit, but it was privately owned. That still does not suffice to be called meeting workforce housing requirements. So you would still have to have somebody come in. Big voice out of that. We would still have to have somebody come in and build something called workforce housing under the federal government, even though we may have 200 houses in town, 400 houses in town, with a population of 1,800 people. That still wouldn't suffice. That's what you're saying.
So some of what you're asking me to do is comment on a hypothetical situation which we know doesn't exist. We know that there aren't hundreds of houses in Middleton or 1,200 or any other rate. If there was, there'd be people dying to get into Middleton because every other community around is charging an average of $2,000, $2,200 a month in rent. Now, is there some count of the number of those houses? I hate to even talk about what comes through before a judge because I don't want to save a route or threaten lawsuits or those kinds of things. But that's where this would get tested. Is if you were saying you got enough and we were saying you didn't, you put your evidence before a judge. And where would you garner the evidence that says you've got 1, 2, or 100 or 1,000 rental apartments in town that rent for every $1,200 when there isn't any data source for that kind of information.
So in other words, you're saying the only way we can meet what you're calling the fair share threshold for workforce housing is we must have construction of something through the government-funded housing to prove that we have.
I can't say that there isn't any other way to establish it or prove it. I just I can't think of the fact scenario that would create that winning argument for you.
If we had testimony from or written historical information from landlords that over the past 10 years, here's how much rent we've charged on an annual basis of this resident, here's how many of them we have, that would carry any weight.
Well, ultimately, if we were having that argument before a judge, I don't think that would be the judge. I think that would be the argument, and if you persuaded the judge that those were the facts and they were persuaded to that.
Right, so based on what you're saying, the only way we could meet workforce housing requirements is by having somebody build one under the auspices of the government.
I think that you need to have some
Under the funding of the government.
whatever it is that constitutes the proof that you would put on in a courtroom is what you have to be able to do. And it certainly would help if you said we've had 5 applications under our workforce housing ordinance in the last 20 years, and we approved 2 of them, or 3 of them, or 1 of them, or 5 of them, but you haven't had any applications and you haven't put in. And obviously the statute was created at a time when, and for the purposes of saying we need to spur more development. And your workforce housing hasn't spurred any development, because there hasn't been one application come forward for workforce housing from the time the regulation was created until today. I mean, other than ours, which was rejected a year ago, here we are again.
Which does not recognize the fact that the mayor of the existing residences, not necessarily multiple apartment buildings, but individual residences, maybe the occasional duplex, that meet that requirement, that rent requirement.
So I can't refuse the idea that there's other evidence out there that we don't have, or we haven't been able to discover the source for, or whatever. But if those things existed when Middleton is participating in the Seacoast Regional Planning Commission's housing needs environment, there would your own team is participating in the creation of this report would have said, hey, wait a minute, that's not right. We're not the worst in the county. We've got some workforce housing, let me tell you about it. Same things that you're telling me right now. Those things didn't surface in that environment, which was sort of a free bite at the apple to, describe your town however you choose. And that information.
I can't respond to that, who was involved. I don't know if anybody on the board was involved in the Stratford County Regional Planning. Did they come to us and ask us that information? I don't know. But thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
I'd like to just clarify on the rental. You said $18.40 a month, that's rent utilities, so that's water, power, included in that $40?
Yes, those things, water, power, heat, sewer, not necessarily cable television, or satellite or any of those kinds of things, or internet. Although I think internet will eventually become one of the utilities that's thought to be essential. It isn't yet.
So you're done with your,
I was, well, perhaps. I know that we talked before at the last hearing, and we went through all of our various criteria, provided a whole bunch of background information. I don't necessarily want to be at all redundant and go through things that you've already heard. I don't know if it helps to briefly summarize what it was we talked about, or do that later, or don't do that at all. You tell me what you need. I don't want people to forget things that were discussed last time. At the same time, the last thing I want to do is prolong our evening beyond anybody's desires.
yeah, you could do have something to do with this correct, and hurt your name, use this meetings, but not a lot of these. Throw it out there, but, yeah, I don't know if we need to rehash every comment that was made at the last meeting.
started out talking about some of the concerns that typically come up with a proposal like this. What does it do to the surrounding property values? What does it do to schools and the number of students? Who's going to be living in this apartment? We talked about how workforce housing, the people that earn in this income level are typically architects and engineers and school teachers and policemen and firemen and that sort of thing. We talked about real data that is actually the gold standard in New Hampshire for determining how many students would be produced in the development, and how it's a fraction of one student per housing unit in multi-family housing of this style, where you're talking about over the course of 38 units, you got, I don't know, 4 students or something like that. So
Some 2 bedrooms per den, so they were, most of them were 1 bedroom.
there was a mix of one and
Well,
two.
we'll go back to that.
Sorry, I was just thinking.
I just wanted to summarize that. We also talked about tax value, and we showed you what we knew about similar buildings in other communities where it did not have any impact on surrounding tax value for buildings with the same architecture, the same look as this building would have. We also produced a letter from a realtor offering their experience and their expertise and what they understood about this kind of development in this kind of community as to whether they thought of the correct property values. And so before we even got into the 5 criteria, we had already talked about values, the surrounding properties, the impact on students and schools, and what kind of people, who are going to be our potential new neighbors if we approve a project like this. And then we go through the variance criteria, we went through the 5 in there. Basically, we talked about the things that were already provided in writing, and so I don't want to necessarily rehash those, or certainly rest on what was provided to you in writing. But I think that all of the variance criteria are very strongly satisfied, especially given the way that the state law dictates how much it is in the public interest to have a project like this, to have workforce housing developed under the workforce housing statute, which is the impetus for you guys to have your workforce housing ordinance. It really is important in the community for this to work. I know that there's a lot of folks who have concerns about what it does to the feel of the neighborhood and the community that they grew up in, and they feel like they made some changes. Hopefully, I think it wouldn't, and the experience has been that it doesn't, but there's no way that I persuade the folks who feel strongly about that that's going to be the case, other than to see it happen and see it actually get built and not cause the potential concerns that come forward. But having strong and valuable workforce housing is so valuable to your community in terms of having people to do the jobs in town, having good members of your community who are going to be teaching in this school or providing work for the police force. There's just an incredible need in the community for a healthy stock of housing that is available to people in the workforce lane. And honestly, I know that there is a statutory construct that deals with what's your fair share, and that is all that you're required to supply. And if you've met your fair share, then you have the right to vote no and move on from there, and you can think about that. But regardless of your fair share, communities get better and better and better by having more people in this workforce housing economic slot that are contributing to their community, to make your community young and vibrant and healthy, and have children and have generation, and have people that are going to move up from these apartments to buy houses and move up from houses and invest in businesses and really make a difference in your community. I know that this is a completely subjective element of argument, but healthy stock of workforce housing is so tremendously important for having a strong, vibrant community. You really should keep that in mind as you think about what is the purpose of the statute. What's the purpose of your ordinance? The purpose of your ordinance is to create realistic and reasonable opportunities for development of workforce housing. Those are the words in the ordinance. And so do we need that spirit of the ordinance? Well, of course we do. Turning us down would be contrary to that spirit, as it's written, as you put it. And the person in the planning board is actually offered that ordinance.
So how many of the 38 units were 2 bedrooms?
Law.
Bedroom, 18 or 2 bedroom, 20 or 1 bedroom. research, a fellow named Russ Tebow, who runs that, and he has been doing it for generations. He and his company and his method have become the gold standard, because not only is it what's relied on by the state and by the regional planning commissions and by a lot of the cities and counties in New Hampshire, but it's been proven over time, it's been tested. And you build a project and you had a projection, and then here it is in existence, and the numbers work out the way that they were predicted to do. And so what has happened to that data as it's evolved over the years, and he has updated it. I think the latest one we gave you in the handout might have been as late as 2020 or 2022. But the number of kids has just gone down and down and down and down. So these numbers have gotten more and more favorable to our proposal, which is to say fewer and fewer children from those types of housing. I've got a presentation on this, and actually, one of the things that's very, very interesting is, I already flipped open to this. This is a, where did this come from? This is new 4-bedroom single-family units generated an average of just under one student per unit. And 2-bedroom units generate less than a tenth of a student per unit. And so 10 times as many students from traditional freestanding homes as there would be from apartments like these, which are 1 or 2 bedroom. This is New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. This is a recent publication that they put together, although I don't know how old the data was that went into their presentation. I'm looking for specific dates on these.
Just thinking, if there was 1/10 of a kid living there with 2 bedrooms, why would you build a 2-bedroom unit? I'm just confused, I guess. But I'm sure there's a reason.
So why would you build a 2-bedroom unit if you've got families without kids? Roommates, 2 people that live together that are friends or colleagues or something that split the cost of rent, make it even more affordable.
Well, so what I'm wondering is, can you provide us with some more information on our school living in 2012 seems like a long way ago. And I would note that that also leads into my other question about your list of workforce housing projects, because they were built in 2010. Then the data may have changed considerably as far as how many kids are there. Like I said, I'm just interested to know what types of projects they were in those towns down 4 hours towns.
Well, you're going to give us the list that you have of the active projects in the towns, and we'll be able to determine the size of the towns from the list. That no problem. And you said you have a more recent New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority study on students, and I assume you can provide us that.
Yeah, I have that and a list of.
And I don't know if I have over the zoning limits, but we might need to add another variance, because if this here talks about that we should only have 50% of 2-bedrooms of the number of units, based on our variance scale.
Well, that's a minimum 2-bedroom, so you can have more. Workforce housing has had at least a certain number of 2-bedrooms.
You said 18 2-bedrooms, 21.
What does the regulation say?
Like that. It says here, in our ordinance.
Right, can you provide it, for our question for the situation, is that, housing development that exclude minor children more than 20% of the units, or do it more than 50% of the dwelling units that fewer than 2 bedrooms shall not constitute workforce housing for the full purpose of the section.
Okay.
So 1820 does not stack up to what you actually provided for our zoning.
Okay, I understand. Let me look into that, and if you will either figure out how to adjust the number of units, or we will figure out how to ask for more variance.
What is special about the property that justifies the use of these?
Well, that's As we talked about before, this is a small part of a big parent parcel. With other information, kind of, if you look on a map, it really is kind of, it crosses over 3 different tax maps to get this whole parcel and how it evolves. And so, in addition to the amount of property that we're able to use for the actual development, the 5.5, 6 acres for the development itself, there's other acreage that will be dedicated to not have any residential or commercial structures or anything built on it. We talked about that before.
You mean the piece that you guys want to use for the golf course?
Yeah, it could be used for golf course. Yeah. And so the uniqueness is none of the rest of the parcels that are available in the Four Corners zone that could be used for an apartment this size has enough other acreage that can be restricted from commercial development to functionally meet the density ordinance that you have, which is 20, 25 acres would support 38 units using your ordinary calculation without any variances at all. We want to concentrate all that development into a 5-acre piece of it to make it economically viable, but in essence, you've still got a larger parcel with the right density, and that's what makes this property unique. There aren't any others that have
No, we don't have it. You would have it. I know that.
Right, that's what makes the property unique. That was the question.
Thank you. In speaking with the board before coming here tonight, they expressed that a site visit might be for them. Would you be open to that?
Of course. Site visit. I feel like I didn't catch the very first thing we talked about tonight for extra data or additional data that we wanted to see. The list of the housing projects that we have, later data on students. You were fixing the question about whether there's another variance needed for the number of 2 bedrooms.
Yep.
And then a site visit. The 4 things that are really
The other thing we were talking about was documentation of how much it costs to
Oh,
police and
cost.
access every building.
Are there other things that I can help provide between now and next meeting? I want to make sure we can try to get along.
You mentioned that because you're financing, you're gonna have to follow the code restriction.
Yes.
Who's gonna verify that?
So there's, the way that it traditionally happens in practice is that HUD actually comes and inspects the property and verifies all those things. The statute in New Hampshire allows the planning board to dictate whoever they want to be the enforcer of those covenants, and I think in the planning and zoning ordinance, it has been delegated to HUD, but that's a choice that the planning board made in your regulation. From our standpoint, it's a matter of being enforces it, whoever we want.
There's any other information? Everybody,
One more thought on the HUD enforcement regulations is it's also subject to any interested party can make reports to HUD and have them come down and investigate. They actively do. They're very serious about their treatments.
Are there like sample regulations from
So I tried to find exactly what those were, what does it mean to have safe and secure, and they needed the lighting and security cameras and all of that. HUD's got about 20 different housing programs, and figuring out which one this one pigeonholes into and what inspection form would they use for it. And I knew that if I brought you the inspection form that I found first, it would be, well, this might not be the right one. I didn't want to create that mess, but HUD is looking for, it's got to be accessible, so you get elevators, and you got to have the right fire codes and extinguishers and carbon monoxide detectors, and even lighting and security cameras, and some of the resident screening that we were talking about before, like anybody that's, you're doing background checks, so anybody that's involved in drug activity or it's on a sexual offender registry, you can't be in the building, and if they are, they become one of those things while they're in the building that evict them. And so there's all sorts of regulations that HUD really focuses on to make sure this housing stays safe, wholesome. When we see the thing, it doesn't turn into, I guess, the old stereotypical kind of public housing. This is public housing, it's private living, but still.
Yes.
No, when we have our site visit, it'd be nice if we could just see the little plan again, and kind of a little bit more what his idea was on location, just so I had an idea, of kind of see where.
I've never been to the site, so I don't know whether it's overgrown or easily accessible, or whether it's easy to point out where to be, but whatever it is that we can do to make it as reasonable as possible, we can certainly do it all. Do you guys typically do your site visits on a Saturday, or?
Yeah.
The idea was probably to do it for the next meeting.
I mean, whatever you want to do it,
Perhaps you guys bring some drawings and stuff. Hopefully we'll have some people there.
And
Because
no
I got-
conversation,
No,
no conversation, like possible people. There will be a presentation, you all may ask questions, there will be no conversation from the public, I was like, you can be there, but conversation will happen back.
yeah, that's important, and we don't want to just have to limit any conversations, just to make sure it's safe for the record, everybody knows, and everybody gets a chance to hear it and learn these side conversations. So typically when I've done site visits in the past, the presentation is strictly, here's the plan, there's the left corner, there's the right corner, here's the back, here's the road. Have any questions? Not sort of any other.
I just want to know the location,
Very good.
thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, we're gonna open it up to, public questions on, whatever. Before we do that, I'd just like to ask you guys, while you're here from the last meeting, obviously you have, keen interest in this, but if we could just try not to, be redundant and put up the same questions and comments, try to be clear as timely as we can. Before we do that, we're going to take a 5-minute break, so we can stretch our legs and use the restroom. Thank you. open it up for you guys. I'll just ask that you step up to the microphone, state your name, and whether or not you're a letter to the project. Yeah, who's the first one? Dave. Hello,
Kelly Benedetti, non-letter.
I'm sorry, I'm sort of keeping track. Rob, can you say your last
Kelly
name?
Benedetti, E-N-D-E-T-T-I, non-letter. I found some information that answers a lot of the questions that we've been having. There's been kind of interchangeable use of workforce housing and affordable housing. To clarify, workforce housing is the housing that the government recognizes as the listing that he has would be government recognized workforce housing, which of course we don't have, we know that. And then we keep running around this term of our fair share, what we should be offering to, society. But I found this on the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority page under what is workforce housing. I'll summarize this real quick, but the term workforce housing means permanent housing intended as year-round residence, available to households regardless of age, and is best provided near places of employment, which obviously isn't Middleton per se. Workforce housing can include, but is not limited to, subsidized and affordable housing. Affordable housing refers to a broad range of places to live for owners and renters. Let's see here, it includes a variety of household types suitable for households with different needs and income levels, including homes, starter homes, townhomes, condos, apartments, and accessory dwelling units. So this does clearly state from the government that we could very well be meeting our share of affordable housing without workforce housing. We do not need workforce housing to meet our share of affordable, as long as we do have homes and apartments and mother-in-law units and all that are affordable. Part of my concern here is, being a tiny town, we obviously don't want this gigantic apartment building because we take pride in our little country town. The purpose of this workforce housing is to provide housing that meets the current climate of outrageous market prices. But here's the thing, the median income, that doesn't change on a whim, that barely changes at all. If we go ahead and build a 40-unit building, and 2 years later the housing market bursts, and we're right back down to what we would consider normal, and most of Middleton is right back in that affordable area, in that affordable range. We live on a sprawling house on 10 acres, and Lord knows that was affordable when we bought it here, 7 years ago. So I see this as a very permanent problem to a temporary problem. It's a very permanent, I didn't want to call it solution, but it creates its own problem for an issue that will eventually go away, meaning the market being so high. And it does also specifically state market price, meaning, again, it doesn't have to be government subsidized in any way. It can be the apartment over your garage can be that affordable housing. It does not need to be government subsidized. But my question, I was a little more curious. Again, I'm trying to figure out, based on the numbers we were given last meeting, this project is not profitable in any way, shape, or form. I think it came up to less than $1,000 a month of profits. So of course we all kind of wondered why are you doing it then? If it's, I'd like to think it's to help the little people, the struggling architects, but why are you doing this? So I was very curious about the 30-year thing you were mentioning with the rents. If we can get a little more clarification on that, my concern is this. We've got this big old unit building built on, potentially, a golf course. At what point are these units now eligible to have granite thrown in and stainless steel and be sold as luxury units? At what point does that happen? So it's very interesting what you said about how if a renter moves out, the house starts over for 30 years, that shoots that way, that completely negates that fear of mine that this is just a backdoor way of getting in a luxury, resort, basically. So my question again is I'm just very curious about how long, and I've searched and I even called New Hampshire Housing to get an answer on it, but haven't heard back. How long do these properties need to remain in this program? And again, that's brought up a lot of new questions where if someone moves out
have fair game for granite and stainless, or does that need to stay in this program for X amount of time? When and how do we see this turn over to private as opposed to affordable, so that we can kick out the starting architects and make them luxury units?
Thank you. You want to take a shot at that, Bob?
I'll certainly do my best, and I don't know if it makes sense to answer after each person offers comments, or let them go over all of them.
She just had some specific questions.
Sure. Yeah. I got you. So how long do they stay restricted? As I mentioned before, it's the Middleton zoning ordinance that creates the most local and enforceable restriction. It says 30 years renewable at each rental. And so yes, that does mean effectively forever. Because obviously unless you have a tenant live there for 31 years, you're resetting that every time somebody comes and goes. The other part about that is whether it's 30 years or the covenant or what HUD requires or whatever, on some level we're kind of debating the public policy discussion around the way workforce housing is defined by the legislature or the federal government or whatever that is. And from our standpoint, we're complying with all the requirements of workforce housing. We didn't define it, we didn't change the definition, we're not shorting the definition, we're not altering the definition. And nobody here plans to be in the housing market or even around owning or running this thing in 30 years. I'm going to turn 56 this year, and I'm 86 years old. I'm certainly not going to be standing in front of members of the Middleton zoning board talking about what to do with this housing project at that age. But if that was the case, that's the system that's what workforce, that's the way it was designed. That's not to see that change take place, but that's the limit of the restriction that has been built into the definition of workforce housing. I didn't create it, and if whoever owns the apartment building in 30 years plays by the rules, those are the rules. And again, your own ordinance creates a much tighter restriction than even the state statute, federal statute requires because of this renewal at each rental provision. So, in essence, they're permanent restrictions, but whatever they are, it's sort of the structure that's designed for workforce housing, and it is what it is. We didn't short it, change it, alter it, modify it, limit it, restrict it, avoid it, any of that. Just by others. There were some questions about a housing bubble and what happens if the housing bubble breaks and how these things change. You would still be required to then lower the rent to meet the new market rent because the HUD rent rate gets recalculated every year by our housing finance authority. And this rent rate also includes utilities. So when you see a recent environment like we've had here where utility bills have gone up quite a lot, rent needs to accommodate that and make room for it and still be under 1840 for the total of rent and utilities. And so there's a lot to this obligation to be here. And some of the other requirements for HUD housing, for the federal recognition of it, includes ADA accessibility. It includes making sure that there isn't any lead paint or asbestos or any of those kinds of things. And to your existing housing stock, and whether it qualifies or whether it doesn't, all those questions come into play. And if someone with a disability can't access workforce housing here because it is ADA accessible, those things matter in that calculation and those numbers. That's why a modern building like this achieves all of those results that you're aiming for with this kind of thing, because it has to meet all of these other standards that perhaps some of the existing housing stock isn't required to meet because first of all, it's private housing stock, and second, it's built in the community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dave?
My question is, getting the brand down better.
Dave, could you state your name and perhaps spell your last name? She's keeping track.
David Brand, D-U-F-R-E-S-N-E. My question is on the land. I'm hearing 25-acre parcel, 5 acres of which are going to bang it all in there and put the back 20 acres into reserve as far as they can build on it, like making it a golf course. First off, it's not a 25-acre lot, it's 150 this even happens. No mention's been made of that. I think that land over there has been subdivided and put together and subdivided over the years many times by the same owner for his convenience and no one else's, obviously. And I think so much is being taken, the cart before the horse, so to speak. He didn't lop off legally, say, okay, this is 25 acres, now I want to make a proposal about this land. He's doing it backwards. Like most sense. You want to do that?
Okay, that's my job, but.
Okay.
We did, Bob.
So subdivision of the land has always been a part of the proposal. I think you may mention in the initial application that it's to be subdivided off the parcel. Yeah, it is a bigger parcel, 175 acres, but if we use that for a yield plan, well, if you get hit with tomatoes over the number of units that will produce, 175 acres would be several hundred apartment units, and so obviously that's the reason for cutting off a smaller parcel or doing something that's more modest size for this. But yeah, no question, it's a bigger parcel, and that's one of the uniquenesses about it. That's part of what we claim in our variance application for what's unique about this parcel that makes it suitable for this kind of development or a hardship if it isn't. Granted, is the size of the parcel is one of the few, if not the only one, in the general vicinity that can support a yield plan of 38 apartments. If I only had 1 acre or 2 acres or 3 acres, I wouldn't be able to support a yield plan and even have any open space, much less, whatever we call it a golf course, whatever we call it a golf course. And who knows whether that will ever happen either. But yeah, absolutely. No question, it's a big parcel and it would have to be subdivided off of it. Those are all planning board functions that they take up at the right time. Obviously, it depends on whether there's a variance to go forward. The order of proceeding with those different kinds of reviews and relief is very normal and usually even some required in some towns that you get your variances first. Because there's a whole lot of engineering, a whole lot of costs, and a whole lot of other things that go into site plan and subdivision. It is worth mentioning that a lot of the questions that people have about how this site will develop, and we heard discussion last time about rainwater and would drainage property and traffic and parking and lighting and everything else. Those are, planning board is going to go right down that road hot and heavy and use a consulting engineer to review the things that our engineers say. And those are all the subjects that are in their wheelhouse.
We can refrain from questions on that, you understand? You can just say that to the planning. I'm saying to the audience.
My question is more on process. Do the townspeople have any say in this development?
I'll take it. So we have ordinances. There are RSAs out there. But if you think that, we have to ask for a lot of different things. It might be something as simple as, you want to put an addition on your place. And, I literally have seen this 1 foot. You need to go 1 foot over because there's a piece of ledge there or something that would cost $60,000 to eradicate. And so you ask for a variance. Well, we have the same 5-step criteria that has to be met. And this project is a much larger scope, so we have legal counsel and they have legal counsel, and so it's a little more difficult and time consuming. But in essence, no. We take your comments and your feelings, and of course we consider all that. But basically, it comes down to the law. And if you fill that, that criteria list out, and you can show us that you're correct, and the reasoning is It's a, I feel a huge amount of pressure. But I also believe that when you live in a community, you should try to give back. And so, all you people sitting up there, you come to these meetings when it's a hot button topic, but I don't see a lot of participation normally in the process, and I certainly don't see a lot of people volunteer. So, with that said, your chance to actually be part of the decision would be my best.
But what you're saying is you don't have any vote.
If
You decide to vote, there's ordinances, the townspeople have no say in whether we have workforce housing or not. So you answer that question, right?
you're having your say, right now, but as far as the vote, the only people that can vote are the board members.
So again, the townspeople have say.
All of towns.
So, no, I understand that, but you don't represent everybody. And that's fine, I understand the process, that was my question. The other concern that we all have is what this is gonna cost the town, and how are we gonna pay for the infrastructure? Because I can tell you, I'm retiring in 3 years, I can't afford the tax rate now. If you're gonna double that, or even increase it after what we just went through this year, many people are not going to be able to afford it. And I have a full-time job making a good amount of money, and I won't be able to afford it. So what is the town going to do about that? That's the burden.
Answer the question.
Sign up for workforce housing.
How would you like me to answer that? I mean, do you think that I want to pay more taxes?
No,
Of course I will.
no, I'm sure you don't.
But again, this is a legal process. You come in, you apply for a variance. As I've said, the criteria is very specific. You're asked to fill that out. We review it. We try to gather all the information we can and make the best decision that we can. And of course, your opinion and input is considered and weighs heavily on us, trust me. But in the end, all we can do is, either approve or deny, okay? And let's be clear, we can deny it on anything, but are you going to win if the town goes and litigates, or if the requestee litigates it, that comes into play as well. And of course, that goes towards your tax dollars as well. So if you see what if you think I'm sitting up here and I don't care, you're wrong.
No, I'm not insinuating at all, honestly. I appreciate every board in this town and people that volunteer. When I retire, I will volunteer.
Well, I look forward to seeing you.
But, those were the basic concerns. Whether we even have a say in this matter, and honestly, it doesn't feel like we do. And the burden, unfortunately, on you.
Well, thank you. You have a question, sir? Oh, she did. You have a response.
So with respect to the question about tax impact or cost of the residents and things, a lot of that has to play out with the planning board's involvement. And so it's pretty common for a planning board to ask for an economic analysis that they have peer reviewed that determines how much is the tax is going to be that come from the property, and then how much school, fire, police calls would you expect from a development like this, and is it tax neutral or tax positive? And I expect that the planning board will likely have that requirement for us, and that's the place to have that discussion. If it doesn't contribute more than it takes away, then certainly the planning board will have to say it as to that goes. Generally, these projects do pay more in taxes than they demand, and the details of all of that come at the planning board level, because that's their job to look into those details. The project itself is not financed by the town or town taxpayers, and if the planning board says something like, I don't think that we would, but if they said you needed a turning lane, or you needed a wider road, or you something as a result of the infrastructure, then they're closing their costs on that way. And those things have to come. I don't foresee there being a need for those kinds of things, but if that's what the planning board says, that's what they say. That's totally within their purview to do that. I do want to comment a bit on the people of the town having a say, because in addition to being an applicant before you, I'm the planning board member, I'm the chair of the planning board in my town, and I take that kind of comment to heart because I do think people have to say. That's why we have a public hearing. It's your opportunity to come here and have a say and tell the board whatever it is you want the board to think. And if you think the applicant's got something wrong, you point it out and you have a say. It's not a voting process for the public. It's not a popularity contest or that sort of thing. If somebody wanted to come and open up a new gas station and you thought we don't need a gas station, that is part of the analysis. You meet all the regulation requirements and you deserve approval. But absolutely, town people have a say. They can come here to you guys and stand on the microphone and tell you whatever we're talking about, and they have. And soon will continue to. And then go to the planning board and do the same thing. And if they don't like that result, they control the body that appoints all of you guys, and in fact, they can volunteer and change and elect and do all of the things that we do in a democracy to have an impact on whatever it is that people local governments do. The one thing it isn't is just sort of a vote of citizens who say who likes it and who doesn't. But there's a ton of input. The last thing I want to say is just to take up on the discussion earlier about 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom units. I did take a look at your regulation and you read it correctly.
We can do that later on. I want to get through
You
these.
got it.
Actually,
My name is Ann Donahue, D-O-N-A-H-U-E, and I'm on the butter. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this project. I have a kind of basic question, which may seem insignificant, but it isn't to me. I was only able to, I came in late to the last meeting, so I missed the beginning. I don't know if the presentation included a little poster board that the landowner brought to us a year and a half ago. But we had a lot of questions, so I would have assumed that the project would have changed based on those questions. From the TV recording the last time and from today, I don't see too many changes that have been done, but that's just my opinion. But I have a question about, does this project still include a convenience store, a drive-through, and a daycare? Because that was included a couple of years ago, and it did create a lot of concern for many of us that came to the meetings about the safety of people with that around. So I see some head shaking, so that's been removed. So the number of units are the same, but a fair amount of space that was dedicated to commercial enterprise
The last one was
is now
34.
left, right? I'm sorry.
The last one was 34 units with some other things, but now
So we
this is,
increased.
yeah.
So 2 years ago, we could build 34 units, but today we need 38. Is that what I heard from the conversation today? In order to be profitable, turn it up?
2 years ago, the application was for 34 units, today it's for 38, and has been the commercial aspect.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate all of your working on it, and I understand. And I will also say something that has no bearing, but I find it very odd that the cart before the horse is happening, that we're talking zoning variances before we've talked about the very fine details that I just spoke about in terms of, oh, that'll be the planning board's job. And I think that that is an odd arrangement. I know it's protocol, I get it, I just don't understand it. And so I'm saying it makes no sense to me. But anyway, thank you for clarifying the question that I had. I appreciate it.
thank you. And I'll just comment a bit as far as, I'll just make a little comment on your us first versus them, we beat the hell out of that house. And they, it's because this whole project hinges on whether they get the variance or not. So it does make sense that they would come here and do it like that. And I think your other questions were all answered. Do you feel like all your questions?
I do, I tried to think.
Okay, appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Mallory Burke, P-U-R-K-E. I'm not in the water. I just have various questions. Is there a buffer zone around this area with the 28 acres so that it's not impinging like really close to the road? And it has free open space. That was one of them. Our fair share has been addressed. But is there like a per capita that equates to our fair share? Like is it 10 per 1,000 units? Or is there an actual number? Or is it just arbitrary? Also, when this had first started, I believe it was like 21, it was an individual that was applying for the variances, and now it is a corporation. Do we have rights to know who is in that corporation? Or is that totally out of the planning board area? That's fine. Thank you.
So there are required setbacks from the road that those do apply. Fair share is one of those annoyingly undefined things in the law. There's no formula, there's no number, it just says every town has to have its fair share. And although I think we all looked at the statute to actually define that, it didn't. So I can't give you a formula or number. This is a corporation, and it's Middleton Workforce Housing LLC. They're registered with the Secretary of State's office. You can go online.
Yeah, their annual report is not up yet.
But you can find out their formation documents there. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
You're welcome.
Are you satisfied at your question?
Yep, fair shares are.
Okay. Thank you. You good, Bob? Okay. Well, you were kind of blended in back there.
You didn't see me. Oh, okay.
Kate Bizarre. Could you spell that for me? I'm sorry. Kate Bizarre, B-U-Z-A-R-D. Thank you. So, we have a workforce housing ordinance, all right. So Bob and Charlie are asking for a variance from current zoning. Everybody, hopefully everybody in town voted for or voted against, but whatever, we got it. So is Bob saying our current workforce housing statute is not compliant with the state RSAs? That's the first question. Is it because if you built it the way the town voted on, you wouldn't be making enough profit on it? Wasn't profitable enough for us? And probably the next couple of things are just observations. I love the workforce housing because we're providing housing for them to work someplace else. We all have probably pretty hefty commutes. And I guess the other thing I want to know is I'm pretty sure, I think he answered it, but they are not exempt, our workforce housing is not exempt from impact fees, and that is up to the planning board to put. And then the other thing is, I kind of find it hard to believe, you keep saying architects and engineers and medical professionals will be living in this place. I don't know, it just doesn't seem quite right to me, but I probably have a lot more questions. Oh, yeah, and then probably this is an observation, I don't know if it's appropriate, but isn't the school at or near capacity? I heard they've already taken over the music and the arts room for school classrooms, but that would just be wrong. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. How about it, Bob?
As quickly as I can, the first comment was, what are we saying about the regulations? Am I saying these regulations are not compliant, and why are they not compliant? Is it because of cost? Yes, exactly those words. I think those are exactly a quote from our application, probably said it 10 times in there. That we think that your regulation as it's built doesn't permit the construction of any workforce housing that's economically viable as the statute requires. So isn't that we're dancing around that point? That is 100% the main argument that we're presenting. In terms of the school being at capacity, there's a lot to that, but, and I don't know the specifics for Middleton Elementary School or the rest of the school district in other towns. But we did provide information in our first meeting that showed the decline in enrollments in schools that's been trending since the mid-1990s, all the way through now, 34 or 5 years later. And the number of students has been just radically dropping. And I think it was like 20% in 8 years or something like that. It continues to slide down and down and down. And so I know this because I get frustrated in my own town. My town of Merrimack passed a school budget that approached $100 million this year. And we were all shocked. And we're like, well, what's going on? We've got less students than before. We've got 1,000 less students than we did 4 years ago. Why do we need all this budget? What's going on? And the delivery of education has become more complicated, more involved, more complex, and that's not fault of the developer that wants to build workforce housing. That's other forces in the universe that are changing and moving that puzzle. I don't have the specific information, but I heard some discussion outside the meeting room that there's a proposal that either is being considered or maybe is approved for 20 freestanding single-family homes in Middleton. 20 single-family homes statistically will produce 20 students. Our proposal will produce 3.4 students on that. And so, are we worried about students or are we not worried about students? Are we only worried about students if they live in multi-family workforce housing? Or, where's the answer to that puzzle? Now, the relief for you guys is none of that has anything to do with variance criteria. Let the planning board sort out all those questions and decide what's the economic impact, whether you're adding, all of those things down to whether the school bus needs a place to pull over. Those are Main Street planning board functions that can be addressed that way. I think that covered all of the comments from that speaker. There was also some discussion about what's different, and I think the board members correctly pointed out that the commercial elements of this are all gone. But there are other changes between the prior application and this one.
No, it's not. That wasn't this one. I'm trying to get through this, but no one else. I'll give you a shot here.
Yeah, well, there was a comment that was raised 2 speakers ago that we didn't stop the speaker, but it's okay.
The water tower.
And the bar architecture, but more than anything else, the other one required 7 variances for setbacks and parking and all sorts of things.
Right.
That was
But
a change.
I think she was really asking, is it in there or is it not in there? We answered her, and I think she did.
Thank you all.
Your other application, Bob, the school, when we built it, and if you question my authority, there's a plaque outside, my name is the first one on, the school board then, the other two, another former school board member. When we built the school, we made sure we had enough room to expand kid-wise, that our classes were not going to be full. We are now maxed out. You look across the hall to the library, you'll see it's been divided up, it's being used as classrooms. Special ed, individual instruction room is now a classroom. Every general use room in this building has been converted to a classroom. So the data that you're coming up with saying, oh, the school's population is dwindling, that may apply elsewhere, but it doesn't apply here. So please don't generalize that. This school is skyrocketing in population. We can't handle any more kids. Just for your own personal information, that's how it is here. You can bring in all the data you want, does not apply to Middleton Elementary School.
Well, thank you. I wouldn't question your authority, especially that comment by saying, I don't know anything about Middleton or this school.
Well, now you do.
I know about the state, which is for the numbers that I said.
Thank you, Bob. John?
John Sidor, S-I-N-D-O-R-F. I'd like to ask the board, when we're determining the feasibility of an 8-unit project or the one they're proposing, how much specificity can you ask for? Because it'd be really interesting to know, you know, I know that you have different entities, like Middleton Workforce Housing, which will either be leasing or purchasing land from another company that one of the principals in New Hampshire, in Middleton Workhouse Housing is involved in. There's an easy way to make things look not profitable for Middleton Workforce Housing, while the other people involved in it are doing very well. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, people who run a lot of corporations know how that works. You know, you own a business, maybe start a delivery company that also handles the business. It's just, I don't know what level of specificity you can ask for in terms of where the actual budget of the entire thing, who's going to get paid before they actually consider it to be financially profitable.
Thank you, John. So just so I'm clear, your question is, do we have your authority to ask who's going to be doing the work? Is that in a nutshell?
Anything that would affect the feasibility of doing it, because there are factors that could be present that would make this very affordable in reality for the people involved, and very profitable, which would not make someone from the outside coming in and purchasing a block of land in Middleton and hiring outside contractors to do it. There's a plan for making a significant amount of profit, and could happen with even an 8-unit properly positioned in the right zone.
I think I'm going to ask Laura to answer that.
So I think what you're asking is how much rent is Middleton Workforce Housing paying to the landowner for the land lease? And I assume that is in here somewhere, but I have not spent a lot of time digesting the program.
Well, I think he was also asking about the contract work that was going to be done and who was going to do it, and he was asking, do we have the right authority to ask those questions?
We have a fairly detailed pro forma. I don't think we can dictate who they're going to use for contractors or how they're going to set up their business operations.
Thank you.
You want to add anything, Bob?
Nothing, sir.
Who,
Sandy Stephen, I'm a butter. I spoke at the last meeting, and this time I just want to reiterate that no one else is to be redundant, but now I actually have the full master plan in front of me, and I would just refer to pages 2 through 7 that we in regards to what the town's vision is, what the town has for housing, what the town has for population, what the affordability is, what the housing projection is, and making your decision.
thank you. Anybody else?
My name is Steve Rollins, I live in East Wayne. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions.
Steve, I'm sorry, I missed your last name.
Rollinson?
Big.
How do you spell
No, I got it.
it? Now, this money to build is coming from the Fed, either it's a grant or a loan, correct?
They're tax credits and loans.
I'm sorry?
Tax credits and loans.
Okay, so it's coming, it is coming from the government, correct?
Yeah.
And did I hear the council say that we had no investment, none of our money going into this building?
The taxpayers are not paying to construct the building or any of the off-site improvements that are required for it.
But essentially, there is money coming from the taxpayers federally. Yeah, not directly from our town to them, but our money to the White House and Congress, anyone. So my money is being used to build something in my town that I don't want. So everybody in their town pays federal taxes. So we're all paying this for something that we don't want. And pretty much just feel it on everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. I know you want to say something, you all right? No? No questions, no comment?
I know he's talking to me. Not at this time.
No?
I'll wait.
Anybody else? Yeah. You're in the law?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't necessarily need to dive into any more substantive discussion because I think we're heading for a continuance to give you more information and do a site visit. So logistically, I've got the list of things that you wanted for information. You got to make sure something was added to that later in the meeting. And then understand what the process will be for scheduling a site visit. I don't know if you guys have a look at calendars and internally propose some things. We're going to do that now and decide. The public wants to know if they have come, or should come.
And if you just formally waive the 90 days, I understand that.
For the review process, yeah, for the vote, of course. Yes, let's get you guys whatever information you need. And do a site visit.
Do you want to run through the list, not just
Of the information? It was a list of the housing projects, the actual list of where they are, what their addresses are, and all that. Later data on the students and the enrollment impacts. The question about whether there's fewer than a certain number of two-bedroom apartments, and that regulation, which I can actually answer now, and that is, rather than seeking another variance for this, we'll simply adjust the number of one and two-bedroom apartments to make it a majority of two-bedroom apartments. You want to do a site visit, and you want to know more about cost of construction of the comparable 6 or 8 unit buildings.
Yes.
Sure. I think Chuck's being a little bit more precise than I was being in terms of that variance question on the number of 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms. We would request here now that we would modify the application to specify 20 2-bedroom, 18 1-bedroom. Same number of total units, 38.
So it looks like from your agenda, you already have a meeting scheduled for June 18th. To that meeting? I don't know what else you might have on that agenda.
The third Tuesday,
We do have a other very request from another person.
Tonight or?
On the 18th.
I mean, we'd certainly be willing to let them go first and be out of the way so they don't have to wait till the end of the long discussion.
Yeah, that's definitely. But okay, so why don't we try to do this? Maybe we start the meeting an hour earlier or something to so others find people don't have to come to the other one if they don't have interest in it. Slip my mind.
Do you want to do it?
Well, we won't have time. I don't think to do another variance plus the site.
Okay. So we'll pick a different date for the second.
Yes.
Okay. So,
Yeah, we're gonna have to discuss it really.
all right, so let's start with continuing the public hearing.
And make a motion that, first, our meeting will start at 6 o'clock instead of 6:30 on the 18th, half an hour later.
Okay. Yeah. I think that will at least get us close.
I'll second that.
All in favor? All right.
And that's to address the other.
We'll do the first, and then segue into the public hearing for this.
So can we go to motion to do this?
Yes, I will make a motion to continue this
public hearing open, closing it for tonight.
Tonight.
Okay, yep,
Well, closing it right now.
but we'll continue it on the 18th, yep.
Well, I don't know if anybody has anything else they want.
Well, Bob's going to put up for information, so that will need to have public hearing still. Okay.
So you second?
Yes.
All in favor? Aye.
We just want to communicate with, about the site visit date, and then it can be posted with whatever the normal course is for posting the meeting.
Yes.
We have to do our first.
We need to pick that now. Yeah, otherwise we don't have it.
Do you need any time to get ready for
I mean, I'm not sure what needs to be done to get ready, because I don't know, maybe we'll talk about what you want to do when you get there and all that. I've never been to the property, so I don't know what conditions it's in, but.
Maybe we just want to see where the building's going to be laid out. I don't know what the condition of the property is, whether it can be staged, so maybe.
Chuck was mentioning to me that just parking at that site can be challenging. It probably needs gathering gear and walking across the street a little bit down.
Okay.
And then go from there. In terms of figuring out how to stake it or mark it or in some way, I don't know if we can be as precise as a surveyor would do, but something that approximates it relatively soon. And then understanding that we want to gather up.
So, this brings to mind a question that I think a lot of people have had, because I've heard people ask me, I wasn't quite sure on it either at first, but somehow it was put out that the building might actually go down on Ridge Road and come in that way. And now it's proposed that go basically where it was going to go before. So maybe you could give us some input. I don't know how that even came up or whatever, but we could just clarify that, yeah, the building is going up here on Kings Highway, and I guess Ridge Road was never even considered by you guys, so I don't know where that came from.
I don't know if somebody was suggesting that as an idea or something, but that's never been part of the plan. It's a part of the plan now, and we'll let you know if that ever changes, but I don't anticipate it.
Can we get a basic sketch of the layout where it's going to be on the layout?
Yes, we gave a little bit of a sketch in the first one, but it's not really clear to see the road and things on the one that we gave you, so we'll get one that's in there a little bit better. How they would work there.
Yeah, that would be helpful, I think. Yeah, as soon as you can get that to us, maybe somebody could put it out on the website or something so everybody can see it, because I just know there's been some confusion about the things that I would agree with, but so I can sum it up that that was never your intention to put it down on the Ridge Road, so.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, good enough.
So, do you want to do it on the morning of June 15th?
The morning, what,
Saturday before Valentine's. Which I know also incorporates like.
let's check with the CEO. Yeah,
Saturday the 15th at 9 a.m. Does that work?
Right now,
I'm not sure how much say I get in this, but I actually volunteer for a charity event on that Saturday morning. Alzheimer's Association.
Saturday the 8th at 9 a.m.
That works for me.
We will meet here
And then walk over.
in the parking lot and walk over.
what's the best way to, what's the best
There will be,
way?
yep.
Is the best way to do it off of things?
Yeah, it will be for where the site is, it's way closer to Kings Highway. It means a couple hundred feet setback, and then that's what building will be on Kings Highway. Whereas it's a long way up. All right.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we meet June 8th at 9 a.m. for site visit, parking lot here at the school.
All in favor?
And open to the public?
Yes.
But,
No question.
as Laura said, there's no
Discussion,
discussion or question, unless it comes from the board. I don't know why, I guess that's the law.
Capturing it in minutes
garage, so.
That's all I have. See that?
I just shake my head.
So, there was a motion, who made the motion?
I made a motion.
And I seconded. The discussion, any changes to be now? All in favor? Your vote? All right, so what's next?
Motion to approve the minutes of April 9th.
Oh,
Discussion? Any changes to the rule?
So just
abstain.
yeah, let me decide.
they just had it last week, so it's not until June.
You're on the phone.
All right.
We're gonna discuss it. All in favor? Aye. Your vote?
Okay, motion to approve the minutes of April 16th. Meeting hearing.
I'll second that.
I refuse myself on the vote, but any changes you need to go to that?
Oh, you're fine. So, yeah.
I just need a vote, maybe you can vote on that.
It's a long, as much, I read almost all of it, he did really good on
Yeah.
trying to capture.
Very good
That's
job.
good fun.
You know, I know she's correspondence with you and everything over there, so I'm that's it. So, all those motions.
All in favor?
Aye.
I abstain.
I make a motion for your turn.
All in favor?
Aye.
You just wanna come back and see this again.
All right, guys, okay. I'm not gonna, I'm just gonna.
Enjoy Memorial Day, everybody.